The morning of August 1st, 1943, dawned hot and still over the vast Libyan desert, where a force of 1,750 American airmen moved with quiet determination, preparing for a mission that would become one of the most harrowing and infamous air raids of World War II. Operation Tidal Wave was not just another bombing run. It was an ambitious, high-risk gamble designed to cripple Nazi Germany's primary source of petroleum, the heavily fortified oil refineries of Ploesti, Romania. From their sun-scorched airfields in Benghazi, crews from the 98th and 376th Bomb Groups worked in disciplined silence, their faces set with grim resolve as they conducted final checks on their B-24 Liberators. The aircraft, parked in long rows, shimmered in the morning heat, their broad, high wings casting elongated shadows across the sand. Mechanics moved swiftly, tightening bolts, checking fuel lines, and ensuring that every machine was at peak performance for the grueling 2,400-mile journey that lay ahead. The stench of kerosene and engine grease filled the air as ground crews worked tirelessly, loading each plane with 3,100 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel and 4,000 pounds of bombs. The mission's objective was clear: strike the Ploesti refineries with overwhelming force, deliver a crippling blow to Hitler's war machine, and then fight their way back to Libya, running the gauntlet of Axis air defenses. The men understood the enormity of the task before them. Ploesti was no ordinary target. It was the lifeblood of the Nazi war effort, supplying an estimated one-third of Germany's oil needs. The refineries were ringed by an intricate web of anti-aircraft guns, smoke generators, and fighter patrols, all designed to transform the city into a death trap for incoming bombers. The Germans knew that an attack on Ploesti was inevitable, and had spent years reinforcing its defenses, making it one of the most heavily protected industrial sites in all of Europe. Unlike previous strategic bombing missions, which relied on high-altitude precision attacks, Operation Tidal Wave would be carried out at treetop level. The B-24s, normally accustomed to soaring above the clouds, would instead be skimming the rooftops of enemy territory, coming in low and fast to evade radar detection and anti-aircraft fire. It was a bold, innovative tactic, but one fraught with peril. As the final preparations were completed, aircrews climbed into their bombers, exchanging solemn glances and last-minute words with one another. Many men took a moment to scribble quick letters to loved ones back home, knowing that some of them would never return. The heat inside the cockpits was suffocating, the metal fuselage baking under the relentless desert sun, yet the sweat on their brows had little to do with the temperature. They were about to fly into the heart of hell itself, and they knew it. At precisely 7:30 a.m., the first aircraft rumbled down the makeshift runways, their massive radial engines roaring to life, kicking up swirling clouds of dust and sand. One by one, the Liberators lifted off, climbing into the hazy morning sky, their silver wings catching the sunlight as they formed up into tight formations. In total, 178 bombers took flight, a vast armada of steel and firepower stretching for miles as it headed north toward its fateful rendezvous with history. For hours, the B-24s droned across the Mediterranean, their engines humming a monotonous, steady rhythm. Some men tried to push thoughts of the impending battle from their minds, focusing instead on the beauty of the landscape below, the endless blue of the sea, the sun-drenched mountains of Greece, the rolling green plains of the Balkans. But as they neared Romania, the peaceful illusion shattered. The first sign of trouble came as the bombers approached their initial navigation waypoint over Albania, where an unexpected wind shift threw the formation slightly off course. Despite efforts to correct, the deviation resulted in confusion among the lead aircraft, causing a critical breakdown in coordination. As the Liberators roared across the Romanian countryside, their intended element of surprise was slipping away. Axis observers had already spotted the incoming wave, and alarm bells rang out across Ploesti. German and Romanian defenders rushed to their anti-aircraft positions, manning hundreds of flak guns hidden among factory rooftops, city streets, and wooded hillsides. Smoke generators were activated, belching thick black clouds that quickly engulfed the refineries in a choking haze, obscuring targets and making precision bombing nearly impossible. The city, already bristling with fortifications, was now transformed into a nightmarish battlefield. Then, the sky exploded. As the first wave of bombers dove into the cauldron, a withering storm of anti-aircraft fire erupted from every corner of Ploesti. Flak shells burst all around the B-24s, shredding wings, puncturing fuel tanks, and tearing through the fuselages with deadly force. Flames and smoke trailed from the stricken aircraft as they struggled to maintain formation, some veering wildly, others plunging earthward in spiraling death throes. The deafening roar of explosions mixed with the steady drone of engines and the panicked shouts over the radios as pilots and gunners fought desperately to keep their planes aloft. Amid the chaos, the bombers pressed on, flying so low that some clipped the tops of smokestacks, their wings barely missing rooftops as they released their payloads. The bombs fell with devastating accuracy, smashing into fuel storage tanks and cracking open refinery towers like eggshells. Within moments, entire sections of Ploesti were engulfed in flames. Enormous fireballs erupted into the sky, sending columns of thick black smoke billowing thousands of feet into the air. The city became an inferno, the heat so intense that it warped the air, distorting vision and making navigation nearly impossible. Yet for all the destruction they inflicted, the bombers were paying a terrible price. One after another they fell, some consumed by fire, others blown apart by direct hits, their wreckage scattered across the burning city. Crews bailed out where they could, but many never had the chance. Despite the carnage, some squadrons managed to break through and turn for home. Their return journey was a brutal test of endurance, with many aircraft barely clinging to the sky, riddled with bullet holes, engines sputtering, fuel running dangerously low. Some never made it back, crash landing in enemy territory, their crews captured or killed. By the time the surviving B-24s limped back to Benghazi, the scale of the disaster was evident. 54 bombers had been lost, and 532 airmen were dead, missing, or captured. The operation had inflicted significant damage on Ploesti, but it had come at an unspeakable cost. Yet, despite the staggering losses, the airmen of Operation Tidal Wave had demonstrated extraordinary courage and determination. Against overwhelming odds, they had carried out one of the most daring missions of the war, striking deep into the heart of enemy territory and delivering a powerful, if temporary, blow to Germany's war machine. Their sacrifice became legend, a testament to the bravery of those who fought in the skies over Ploesti, where the flames of war burned hotter than ever before Colonel Keith K.O. Compton, commander of the 376th Bomb Group, exhaled a slow, steady stream of smoke, the acrid burn of his umpteenth cigarette barely registering as he studied the mission maps spread across the hood of a battered jeep. The early morning heat in the Libyan desert was already oppressive, making the air shimmer above the rows of parked bombers. But the sweat trickling down Compton's neck had little to do with the temperature. This mission, this insane, audacious plan, could change the course of the war, or it could be a massacre. The target was Ploesti, Romania, Hitler's lifeline, the vast oil complex that churned out over 8.5 million tons of refined fuel annually, providing nearly one-third of Germany's entire petroleum supply. Without Ploesti, the Luftwaffe's fighters and bombers would be grounded, the panzer divisions would be reduced to steel coffins, and the mighty war machine of the Third Reich would grind to a halt. But hitting it wouldn't be easy. Unlike previous high-altitude raids, this mission called for a low-level bombing run, skimming just 200 feet above the ground to ensure pinpoint accuracy. The B-24 Liberators were heavy bombers, designed for high-altitude precision strikes, not for racing between smokestacks and rooftops at near-stall speeds. But the planners believed this approach was the only way to catch the enemy off guard, avoiding detection until the bombers were already over the target. Compton took another long drag from his cigarette, tapping the map with 2 fingers as he ran through the attack profile for the 100th time. The 178 B-24s of the 9th Air Force would launch from Benghazi, Libya, fly 1,200 miles across the Mediterranean, cross over Greece, Albania, and Bulgaria, then descend to treetop level for the final approach into Romania. The entire formation would split into 5 attack groups, each assigned to a different refinery complex. Timing was everything. If one group got lost or fell behind, the enemy would have time to react, and the entire mission could collapse into chaos. He could hear the nervous laughter and banter of his men in the background, young airmen, many barely 20 years old, performing final checks on their aircraft, their faces masked with a mixture of bravado and unspoken fear. Some played poker, others sat quietly with letters in their laps, half-written notes to wives, girlfriends, or parents, their hands trembling as they tried to put words to the gnawing dread in their stomachs. Everyone knew the odds. The flak defenses around Ploesti were legendary. Hundreds of anti-aircraft guns, hidden in the forests, embedded in factory rooftops, and mounted on railway cars that could be repositioned at a moment's notice. To make things worse, the Germans had laid out elaborate smoke generators across the refineries, capable of blanketing the entire target area in thick, blinding clouds within minutes of an air raid warning. Somewhere in the distance, an engine roared to life, a deep, guttural vibration that sent a tremor through the ground. The first bombers were warming up. Mechanics rushed between aircraft, securing last-minute panels, checking fuel lines, and ensuring that each plane's 3,100-gallon fuel tanks were topped off for the grueling 2,400-mile round trip. The air stank of high-octane aviation fuel, sweat, and desert dust, a scent that would forever be seared into the memories of the men who flew that day. Compton looked up as General Uzal Ent, overall commander of the mission, approached. Ent was a hard, no-nonsense officer, but even he looked grim. No one spoke. The plan was already in motion. There was nothing left to discuss. At 7:30 a.m., the first bombers taxied onto the makeshift runway. Dust kicked up in thick, choking clouds as the B-24s began their takeoff roll, their 4 1,200-horsepower engines straining under the weight of their bomb loads. One by one, they clawed their way into the sky, forming up into tight combat formations. The mission had begun. For the first few hours, the flight was smooth, almost eerily calm. The deep blue of the Mediterranean stretched endlessly below them, and for a brief moment, it felt almost peaceful. Some crew members allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, the mission wouldn't be as bad as they feared. But as they neared the Balkans, reality set in. The first sign of trouble came over Albania, where an unexpected wind shift threw off the lead navigators. The slight miscalculation forced the formation several miles off course, which might not have mattered on a routine mission, but on a low-level precision attack, it was disastrous. Some crews adjusted, but others became disoriented. By the time the B-24s crossed into Romania, the Germans were already on high alert. The defenders at Ploesti had spotted the incoming bombers long before they arrived, and the city was already bristling with anti-aircraft fire when the first wave screamed over the treetops. As the Liberators roared into the target zone, Ploesti erupted into a cauldron of fire and steel. The sky filled with black flak bursts, deadly shrapnel-shredding wings, engines, and cockpits. Some bombers were hit before they even reached their targets, their flaming wreckage crashing into the refineries below. Others pressed on, dodging smokestacks and power lines, their gunners firing wildly at the enemy positions on the rooftops. The roar of 50-caliber machine guns mixed with the deafening explosions of bombs hitting fuel depots, sending columns of black smoke thousands of feet into the sky. For some crews, survival came down to mere seconds. One B-24, already badly damaged, flew so low that its landing gear clipped a house, sending it into a violent spin before crashing into a fuel storage tank. Another bomber, its engines aflame, plowed into a factory courtyard, its payload detonating on impact in a massive fireball. Dozens of men were killed instantly. Despite the carnage, many of the bombers made it through, dropping their delayed action bombs onto the refinery infrastructure before peeling away and heading for the escape route. But for many, the return journey was just as brutal. Low on fuel, their aircraft riddled with bullet holes, some struggled to stay in the air. Several crash-landed in enemy territory, their crews taken prisoner. Others simply vanished into the mountains, never to be seen again. When the surviving B-24s finally limped back into Benghazi, the scale of the disaster became clear. 54 bombers had been lost, and 532 airmen were dead, missing, or captured. Though the raid had inflicted serious damage, it had not been enough to permanently cripple Ploesti. Within weeks, the refineries were repaired and back to full operation. For Compton and the men who had flown into the inferno, the mission would forever be etched into history, not just as a costly miscalculation, but as a testament to the extraordinary bravery of those who had dared to strike at the heart of the Nazi war machine. At precisely 700 hours, the first B-24 Liberators began rolling down the sun-baked runways of Benghazi's desert airfields, their Pratt and Whitney R 1830 twin Wasp engines roaring as they clawed for altitude in the heavy morning air. The heat was already oppressive, shimmering in waves over the endless sand. But inside the cockpits, the sweat that beaded on the brows of young pilots had little to do with the temperature. Shrapnel tearing through the bombers' aluminum skins, shredding fuel tanks, severing control cables, and igniting onboard ordnance. Some planes were blown apart instantly, their pieces raining down over the flaming refineries below. Others, their engines spitting flames, pressed on toward their targets, their crews screaming over the intercoms as they dodged smokestacks, skimming mere feet above rooftops. Lieutenant Lloyd Hughes, piloting the Sandman, had one engine already ablaze when he made his bombing run. But instead of breaking away, he held course, flying straight into a wall of fire and flak, determined to deliver his bombs accurately. His plane never made it out. The disaster unfolding in the skies above Ploesti was a direct result of the earlier navigational error, a cruel twist of fate that had transformed a daring mission into an aerial bloodbath. By the time the survivors turned southward, limping back toward the Mediterranean, 54 B-24s were missing, either shot down, crash-landed, or abandoned. The mission had been costly beyond words. Despite heroic individual successes, the refineries at Ploesti, though heavily damaged, were not fully destroyed. Within weeks, the Germans had repaired much of the infrastructure, and the Third Reich's war machine continued to run on Romanian oil. For the men who survived, Operation Tidal Wave would forever remain a testament to their courage, their sacrifice, and the unforgiving brutality of war. Chaos erupted over the intercoms as the realization of the navigational mistake dawned upon the mission commanders. The carefully planned low-level assault on Ploesti, which had depended on split-second coordination, was now completely unraveling. In the confusion, some bomber groups immediately turned north toward the target, desperately trying to correct course, while others continued eastward toward Bucharest, before realizing their error and backtracking. The synchronized assault that had been designed to strike multiple refineries simultaneously and overwhelm German air defenses had collapsed into disarray. Worse still, the errant course had taken the bombers directly over a heavily fortified German early warning station. a listening post bristling with radio operators and radar technicians monitoring Romanian airspace. Within minutes, the entire German air defense network in the region was on high alert. In the cities below, sirens wailed as emergency klaxons signaled incoming enemy aircraft. Anti-aircraft crews scrambled to their stations, ramming shells into their 88mm flak guns and 20mm autocannons. Across Ploesti, German soldiers ran through trenches and sandbagged bunkers, setting up additional machine gun nests and aiming their weapons skyward. The airfield at Otopeni, north of Bucharest, launched dozens of Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, their sleek forms ripping through the sky toward the incoming bombers. Ploesti's defenses, already formidable, were now fully awake, locked, and waiting. At 14:30, the first disorganized waves of B-24 Liberators finally appeared over Ploesti, their massive four-engine silhouettes casting long shadows across the hellish industrial landscape below. What they saw sent a jolt of terror through even the most hardened veterans. The oil refineries stretched out for miles, a labyrinth of steel towers, storage tanks, and pipelines, each one a vital artery pumping fuel directly into Hitler's war machine. The target had been studied countless times in mission briefings. But from this low altitude, barely 200 feet off the ground, it looked impossibly vast, sprawling in every direction. Smoke was already billowing into the sky, curling into thick black plumes that twisted in the wind, the result of burning oil drums ignited by the first scattered American bombing runs. The Germans had deployed hundreds of smoke pots, creating blinding defensive screens meant to disorient the incoming air crews. In the chaos of their botched approach, the American bombers were now coming in piecemeal, attacking from incorrect angles, instead of their planned, coordinated, overwhelming strike. Then, all hell broke loose. Colonel Keith K.O. Compton, leading the first wave in Teggy Ann, bore down on the target, his bomber skimming over rooftops so low that his crew could see Romanian refinery workers sprinting for cover. Before they even released their payload, the sky exploded. A solid wall of flak, machine gun tracers, and incendiary shells erupted upward, transforming the airspace into a churning inferno of fire and steel. "It looked like someone had turned on a fiery faucet in the sky," recalled Tail Gunner Sergeant Ed McHale of the 98th Bomb Group, watching as streaks of red-hot tracers lanced through the formations, shredding aluminum skin, igniting fuel tanks, and punching through cockpits. The thundering explosions of flak shells ripped entire wings off aircraft, sending flaming bombers spiraling downward, their crews trapped in a coffin of fire. Some of the B-24s, already critically damaged, pressed on, flying through curtains of lead and shrapnel, their pilots screaming over the radios, "Just hold her together," before being blown apart mid-air. Others, fatally hit, careened into the refinery itself, their payloads detonating on impact, sending fireballs the size of city blocks rolling skyward. Aboard the Sandman, Lieutenant Lloyd Pete Hughes struggled to keep his crippled aircraft on course. One engine already ablaze, he pushed forward through the maelstrom, refusing to abort his bombing run. The ground seemed so close that his bombardier could see the terrified faces of German soldiers manning their flak guns. As Hughes reached his target, he released his bombs with perfect accuracy, striking a massive fuel depot, but his burning aircraft, its controls unresponsive, slammed into the ground moments later, engulfed in a towering inferno of burning oil. The nightmare was far from over. Dozens of American bombers, unable to find their designated targets due to the smoke screens, dropped their bombs blindly or were forced to make desperate last-minute adjustments, throwing off the mission's effectiveness. Some were so low that their bombs barely had time to arm before impacting the ground, resulting in dud hits or incomplete detonations. Others overshot their marks, hitting civilian areas or adjacent factories, their pilots unable to correct course while dodging relentless gunfire. The German fighters arrived in full force just as the surviving bombers struggled to break away. Squadrons of BF-109s and FW-190s swooped down like birds of prey, their 20mm cannons cutting through the straggling, battered bombers with merciless precision. Desperate American gunners fought back, sending streaks of .50 caliber bullets into the sky, hitting some enemy fighters. But the odds were overwhelming. More Liberators fell, crashing into farmland, rivers, and industrial yards, their crews bailing out, only to be captured or killed upon landing. By the time the survivors turned south, limping back toward the Mediterranean, the sky over Ploesti was a graveyard of smoldering wreckage. 54 B-24s were missing, either shot down, crash-landed, or abandoned. The refineries were left burning, some heavily damaged, but not completely destroyed. Within weeks, the Germans had repaired much of the infrastructure, and Hitler's war machine continued to run on Romanian oil. For the airmen who returned to Benghazi, the victory was bittersweet. Though they had inflicted serious damage, they had paid an unfathomable price. Medals of honor were awarded, stories of unbelievable bravery were told, and fallen comrades were mourned. But for those who survived Operation Tidal Wave, one thing remained certain. Ploesti had been a battlefield unlike any other, where the sky itself had burned, and courage had been measured in blood. Lieutenant Flavel's Wongo Wongo took a direct hit from an 88mm shell and disintegrated in midair, killing all aboard instantly. The Sandman, piloted by Lieutenant Hughes, flew through a curtain of fire so intense that the plane's aluminum skin began melting. With his aircraft burning and 2 engines out, Hughes held formation long enough to drop his bombs squarely on target before crashing into the Astra Romana refinery in a fireball that could be seen for miles. Through this maelstrom of steel and flame, the B-24s pressed their attack. Colonel John Killer Kane's 98th Bomb Group made their run against the Columbia Aquila refinery through what Kane later described as a corridor of flashing guns that seemed to stretch to infinity. His own plane, Hail Columbia, took over 200 hits, but still managed to place its bombs dead center on the cracking towers before limping away. The scene inside the bombers was apocalyptic. Gunners screamed warnings as German BF-109s dove through the formations, their cannons blazing. Bombardiers struggled to sight through smoke and flames. Pilots wrestled with controls as flak shredded wings and engines, in the which, co-pilot second lieutenant. Joseph Tate watched in horror as a 20mm shell exploded in the cockpit, decapitating the pilot beside him. Somehow, Tate managed to grab the controls and complete the bomb run before passing out from blood loss.